The Egyptian Tomb Raider by Ben Stevens. I was born in the city of the dead. Does this statement surprise you? Yet in this place there are almost as many living souls as dead ones. Allow me to explain. We Egyptians call it El Arafah, the cemetery. Countless tombs and mausoleums all jumbled together, through which cut miles of winding alleyways and lanes. Legend states that the city of the dead began with an Arab military commander who led the Muslim conquest of Egypt all those hundreds of years before, and who established his family's tomb at the foot of Cairo's Mokattam Hills. Other families soon built their own tombs around this one, and thus the city of the dead began spreading outwards. So ornate are many of these tombs, relatively large inside and a blessedly cool refuge from the scorching heat of the midsummer sun, some 2 or even 3 stories high, with domed minaret-like structures, that many poorer people realised it made sense to reside within such places, even while they were still alive. After all, we come merely from dust, and when we die we return to dust. Truly, what does it matter where we live? Every man has his day, and when this is ended, Allah summons us back to his kingdom. Such is how life has been since the dawn of creation. For those of us who follow the Muslim faith, I mean. So, I came into being in the interior of my family tomb. Allah was truly merciful, for even as a newborn I survived the plague which ravaged Egypt and in particular the densely populated city of Cairo, and which caused possibly half of those living residents within this sprawling cemetery to quickly become dead ones. My parents were also included in this number, and it fell upon my father's father to have to inter his son's body, together with the body of my mother. And so my grandfather raised me, until the time came that he was also summoned by Allah. My grandfather was a stonemason, still constructing or repairing those tombs within the city of the dead, even though his hair was quite white and his limbs shaky with fatigue. He attempted to teach me his trade, as my father, also a stonemason, would have done had he survived. But from an early age there was some source of mischief in me, and however much he thrashed me, my grandfather could not persuade me to take this life seriously, and thus learn a good trade with which to earn my bread. He was a fair man, however, and viewed with tolerance those people who held views different to his own. I can still remember those words he taught me, making me repeat them every evening even after the call to prayer, for that particular time of day, had been given from the minaret of the mosque nearest to the area of the city of the dead in which we lived. Ah yes, I am an old man now, but still sometimes I close my eyes and I venture deep into my soul, and I can remember how beautifully and melodiously the muezzin gave the adhan, the call to worship, 5 times daily. But I was saying how from my grandfather I learnt tolerance, and that certain, necessary sense of resignation concerning life in general. He taught me such essential things, at least, making me say the same words every evening. In the name of Allah the Most Merciful, tell the disbelievers this: I don't worship what you worship, and you don't worship what I worship. I will not worship what you worship, and you will not worship what I worship. You have your religion, and I have mine. With this said and understood, let us live in peace. But you are no doubt wondering how you come to be talking to this old Egyptian man, here at an inn in a Japanese harbour town. I have heard of you, Ennin Sensei, and of those many stories concerning you which your servant here writes. I have been in Japan many years now, forced to flee Egypt while still a very young man. I am fortunate that the daimyo of this region is relatively tolerant of foreigners. So long as we are not too great in number, speak Japanese, and generally keep ourselves to ourselves. My religion, similarly, I must practice almost in secret, although, given the strong dislike with which some daimyo view any religion other than Buddhism, I am grateful I am allowed to practice it at all. But this is a harbour town, after all, which generally contain more gaijin than would be considered decent further inside Japan. So a certain leniency may be expected. In any case, I believe you have a knack for investigating all that is strange and unusual, Ennin Sensei, and that, on a couple of occasions, your cases have concerned the antics of the Gaijin. Yet hear me now, as I describe to you a wholly different country and culture than the ones you know, and, in doing so, tell you a story of tomb robbery and an ancient, deadly curse. Yes, an ancient curse. I see you trying to hide your smile, Ennin-sensei, while your servant Kukai glances at this vase of sake that is set upon our table. Yet, have you seen me drink from it? You both have. Drunk from the vase, I mean. But there is only green tea, a drink I have grown to love, seeing as you Japanese have yet to fully embrace the pleasures of coffee, in my cup. For my religion forbids me to drink alcohol. So trust that I speak with a sober tongue, at least. And though I may be old, still I believe I am in full possession of my wits. And so I tell you that this curse, made using dark magic from the Old Kingdom, was the very reason I was forced to flee Egypt for my very life. For, if ever I return to my country, I will die that exact same night, in precisely the same manner as those two older men who also broke into the burial chamber of the ancient Egyptian Queen Mehuit, wife of King Teput, died. Upon the death of my grandfather, then, that good and wise man who'd fruitlessly attempted to install in me some sense of responsibility and seriousness, I took to running wild. I was barely in my teens, still a child. Yet, in my mind, I was fast becoming a man. There was no one left to look after me, so I had to look out for myself. At least I still had a roof over my head, for most nights I returned to my family tomb, which, while hardly the grandest one in the city of the dead, was still more than spacious for me, now that I was its sole living occupant. I met up with other youngsters, similarly determined to steal, fight, and in general make mischief, and I ventured beyond the city of the dead, venturing into the grand city of Cairo. At its edge was the eternal golden desert, the great pyramids, the mysterious Sphinx. Within these pyramids there are believed to be great treasures, stored in the tombs of the ancient kings and queens. Occasionally there were whispered stories of grave robbers who'd been spectacularly successful, somehow locating exactly where one such tomb was and managing to break inside, stealing the gold and other precious objects and then getting away, using stones to close the entrance hole they'd made with metal tools, so that no one would even know that the pyramid had been broken into, unless they happened to look very closely. But everyone knew, those of us with an interest in such activities as grave robbing, that is, just how fraught with danger this form of looting was. If they caught you, the authorities would think nothing of chopping off one or both of your hands, perhaps also branding the Arabic word for thief upon your forehead, so that you became nothing more than a hideous, walking but still barely living warning to anyone else with similar criminal intentions. And the ancient, godlike rulers of Egypt had had their spectacular tombs constructed using fiendish cunning. You'd finally managed to break inside, in the process shifting great quantities of stone from the outside, and proceed along some tunnel only to find that it abruptly finished in a dead end. Or, 1,000 times worse, you'd step upon some secret spot on the floor, there in the darkness only barely illuminated by your spluttering oil lamp, and a great block of stone would come crashing down just behind you, thus sealing you and your screams in this tunnel forever. And even if you managed to break inside a pyramid, entering it somewhere along its base or, more likely, at a precise point higher up those great sloping walls of stone, and then effectively navigated what could be a maze of tunnels, the smooth, sandy walls decorated with those strange, ancient Egyptian characters which no one is now able to properly read, though some Arab scholars have tried, to the entrance of a tomb, you still had to then break your way inside that. There might be 3 solid blocks of granite in your way. You'd have to recruit help, get other men with the promise they'd share in whatever wealth was lying inside, and return night after night, stationing a watchman outside who might very well just decide to betray you to the authorities, for anyone turning over a tomb raider was always well rewarded. And then there was rumour of the dark magic protecting the tombs, brought into place by priests reading from the sacred scrolls, as the embalmed body of the king and queen contained inside the sarcophagus was brought into the tomb by a troop of slaves, who were doomed perhaps to be sealed up in the tomb along with this sarcophagus, once the burial ceremony was concluded. Yes, the dark magic of ancient Egypt, which it was said could still reach across time and space to get a man even as he rode upon his horse far from the tomb he'd plundered, chuckling at his triumph and wondering how he might spend his newfound fortune. As you may by now well realise, grave robbing, tomb raiding, call it what you will, was, and doubtless still is, a career hardly suited to those who are weak of nerve. But I was young and, though desperately poor, still I possessed plenty of courage. So it was that I came to be noticed by a man old enough to be my father. Indeed, for a good while Samad was like my father. I was slim and wiry, though unusually strong for my age, and so Samad would order that I climb in through some window or other, thus, and always in the dead of night, entering a prosperous-looking property somewhere in Cairo. I would then either open the main door, so allowing Samad to also steal inside whatever property we decided to rob, or just pass down whatever valuable objects I was able to find. There, as I crept around the rooms in which people were sometimes sleeping, the family or important servants of a rich merchant, perhaps. In return, Samad clothed and fed me, and also gave me a little money, which I hid there in the tomb in which I still lived. Working for Samad was indeed almost like a job. When I was finished, we separated, until the next time he decided that he needed me. He was clever, and took it upon himself to tell me many things, while we planned our next crime, or just as we roamed around the streets of Cairo at night, searching for something to steal. The many and varied things Samad taught me included Egyptian history, for while we remain under the yoke of the Ottoman Empire, still we Egyptians are a proud race, with a civilization that stretches back to the dawn of mankind. I have heard of no other place where such things as the pyramids may be seen, and no one knows how it was possible for people living so many hundreds of years ago to have dragged all those countless tons of block into position in such a precise manner. And these pyramids were the source of Samad's obsession, or rather, the treasures which undoubtedly do lie within them. We made a reasonable living through committing such petty crimes as I have just described, but Samad was a man of somewhat grander aspirations.
"Just one stroke of luck, boy."
He generally called me boy.
"Just one real haul, and I would be set up for life. I could leave the stinking city, set up a large house of servants somewhere along the Nile, live like a king for the rest of my days."
There was no shortage of people claiming to know the precise location of a burial chamber, situated within one of those grand pyramids at the edge of the desert. Naturally, they required a fee before they would consent to pass such information on. The payer would then embark on what would almost certainly be a fruitless, perhaps even fatal quest, while the person now in possession of some money would melt back into the teeming mass of humanity existing within Cairo, congratulating themselves on their audacity, together with the payer's stupidity. But all those who knew Samad feared him. He was short of temper and quick with a knife. So whereas many other thieves, robbers and other such sorts habitually betrayed and cheated one another, Samad was treated with a definite respect, and so to those many he went to, the ones who made it quietly known that they had information concerning the location of a burial chamber, Samad was never cheated. His keen eyes read the very souls of these wretched swindlers, and they averted their gaze and mumbled that they could not help him, except one day for one man, impossibly wizened, and the owner of a small, covered stall attached to a single-storey building, made from blocks of sandstone, there in the main marketplace, where Samad and a small group of men liked to sit and smoke the large and elaborately shaped pipe called a hookah. This owner, wrinkled as a raisin, and with one eye missing amidst a mass of hideous scars, just sat near his customers, nodding occasionally at something that was said, and taking the coin or two each man paid with a claw-like hand. I had never heard him speak. Yet one day, when there was only Samad and myself at the stall, the old man croaked quite suddenly,
"I can feel myself dying, Samad. Yes, dying. It cannot be long now. You get to realise such things if you get to be as old as me. So come inside with me, and I will tell you something I've known for many years, but never quite known how to act upon. Maybe it's just because I saw too much adventure when I was young, and losing this eye made me want to live a somewhat quieter existence, without exposing myself to too much danger, even for the chance of becoming fantastically rich. Still, if any man should finally be told of the information I've held for so long up here," the old man tapped one temple with his finger, "it is you. Maybe you will know better how to act upon it. So leave the boy outside and come inside with me."
Some hours passed before Samad came back outside. His sharp brown eyes were gleaming, and he was breathing a little faster than usual.
"Come, boy,"
was all he said to me.
"we have much work to do."
That very evening, as it grew dark, we ventured into the desert, there among the towering, silent pyramids. Samad gazed up at the sky, the stars very bright in the rich purple sky. Samad seemed to use these stars as he navigated his way over to one pyramid, mumbling to himself all the while. Then he at once scrabbled up one of the great sloping walls, which were once smooth but were now much pitted, making them easy to climb. I followed him, not daring to say anything. Another look at the stars, and then Samad caught his breath as he traced his finger around one large lump of stone.
"The 3 marks," he breathed. "Yes, this one has the 3 marks of which the old man spoke, designed to look just like mere scratches, accidentally made as this block was levered into position by other slaves all those hundreds of years ago. We return tomorrow night, boy, this time with tools."
I returned to my family tomb almost beside myself with nervousness and excitement. It was certain we were set to rob a pharaoh's tomb. The old man at the hookah stall had clearly given Samad exactly the sort of information that other men spent their entire lives fruitlessly seeking. I met up with Samad the following evening and discovered that he had engaged another helper, a thin, jackal-faced man named Fuad, whom I took an immediate dislike to. I saw that Samad had recruited this man primarily because he could be bullied into keeping his mouth shut. We had tools, large bars made of metal. Making sure we were not followed, we ventured out of the desert, climbed a little way up the same pyramid as the previous day, and then all 3 of us set to work leaving out the stone with the 3 marks. I pass over the sheer, tedious, back-breaking nature of the work. Finally, we had to hammer the large stone into several pieces, which we placed carefully beside the opening we had made in the pyramid, for these pieces of stone would be put back into place once we had finished. The most successful tomb raider is the one whose robbery is never even realised. All the time, as we worked, we were alert for any noise coming from around us, for anyone coming across us would know in an instant what we were up to. An aperture was created large enough for a man to crawl inside. Samad instructed me to be the first one in, making me cover my mouth with a piece of cloth he tied in place behind my head.
"It's bat droppings the other robbers breathe, which sometimes cause them to get sick later on, and so lead to this nonsense of curses," he said harshly. "But with this covering in place, you'll be all right."
This in itself shows just what a practical man Samad was, scornful of the ancient superstitions and beliefs which many Egyptians still have. But entering inside the eternal black stillness of this pyramid, my heart beating loud in the narrow chamber as Samad passed me a flickering oil lamp, I wasn't anything like as confident.
"Go,"
hissed Samad.
"See what you discover, if there really is a tomb belonging to the queen called Mehuet."
That was the last thing I wished to do, but still, my fear of arousing Samad's temper drove me forwards. A tunnel that twisted here and there, gradually becoming bigger until finally I could walk rather than crawl, although I had to keep crouched low. The lamp barely flickered there in the stifling stillness, but it threw the slightest light onto the walls either side of me. These were decorated with coloured pictures and also carvings, the sort of thing you can see on many an ancient building or other structure in Cairo and across Egypt as a whole. Only I was the first man seeing these particular images and carvings in who knew how many hundreds of years.
"Well?"
Samad's voice came irritably along the tunnel behind me. "Come," I called back, suddenly no longer feeling afraid or even in the slightest bit nervous. "Come and see for yourself." Shortly, Samad and a trembling Fuad were also crouched down in the tunnel.
"Careful now,"
breathed Samad, as we advanced slowly forwards, the nighttime breeze blowing in from the desert slowly displacing the fetid atmosphere of this tunnel set in the pyramid, meticulously designed by some architect of ancient times.
"Careful we don't activate any sort of trap."
At this, Fuad gave a whimper, and my opinion of him sank still lower. Both he and Samad also had their mouths covered, although there was no evidence of any dung lying on the smooth, sandstone floor. Of what happened there inside that pyramid, I could say a million words, and still not come close to describing everything that I saw and felt. But in time, using our tools, we forced our way inside the tomb that was at the end of the long tunnel. It seemed almost too easy. No dead ends, traps, or even other tunnels to navigate. Piled furniture in this small tomb, wooden statues of dogs and all those other animals and servants who would serve Mehuet, the entombed wife of the pharaoh Tepet, as Samad had already taught me, in the afterlife. For whatever reason, it seemed as though Tepet's own burial chamber lay elsewhere. But there were also gold ornaments, silver objects and precious stones. These Samad greedily gathered up, throwing them into a large sack he'd brought with him.
"We'll break open this sarcophagus. The one with the Queen's body inside it. There'll be more precious objects in there, that's for sure."
But staring at the outer stone sarcophagus, I at once felt a chill seize my heart. Thereupon it was written something in the ancient language of that time, the one with the pictures which no one now can read. Yet the meaning of this particular message, at least, was clear. I knew, as did most Egyptians, just what the ostrich feather of truth, the scarab, the jackal-faced man, the long-beaked bird symbolised. Even if I could not read or speak what the message actually said, still I knew it to be a curse upon whoever broke open the ancient queen's sarcophagus. I almost said something, but already Samad and Fuad were attacking the stone object with their metal bars. There was no time to waste, after all. Anyone venturing out in the desert, walking among the pyramids, might see the hole we had made a little way up, and investigate themselves, or else alert the authorities. We would then be caught red-handed, as it were. So we broke open the stone sarcophagus, the lid breaking as it hit the floor. Inside was a wooden sarcophagus, which Samad immediately set about smashing apart. At once the light from the 3 lamps we had burning dimmed, nearly going out and thus leaving us in pitch darkness. Fuad again gasped, and this time so did I.
"Fools!"
spat Samad, sweat dripping from his brow as he fast exposed the shrouded body of the ancient queen.
"Help me!"
We saw at once, the flames of the lamps again inexplicably growing brighter, that various gold trinkets and other such ornaments had been placed at various points around the preserved corpse. Samad grabbed at them, again putting them in his bag, and after a moment Fuad and I assisted him. And then I saw what was held in the mummy's hands, joining them together, as it were, on top of its belly. A simple length of rope, folded in a round shape. Confused by it, its purpose I mean, just what it was supposed to signify, I tried drawing Samad's attention to it. In return, he merely slapped me hard around the head, by now consumed with his desire to plunder everything of value within this burial chamber, and then to get immediately away.
"Fool! What do we care about a simple piece of rope? What does it matter? Take one lamp, scour every inch of this small burial chamber, see that we have missed nothing of any value. This is hardly the grandest of resting places, the reason, perhaps, why it was relatively easy to gain entry here, but still, we are all going to become rich men."
It was this final observation that galvanised me to overcome the deathly chill I still felt in my heart, which had caused something like a fog to cloud my mind, almost paralysing my limbs. I knew that Samad sneered at talk of curses, dark magic and the like, and as I obeyed his order to search this small burial chamber, I attempted to do the same. Still, within this great triangular-shaped mausoleum constructed so long ago, with who knew how many tons of rocks above and all around me, this was not so easy to do. Eventually, dragging the full bag of gold ornaments and other objects behind us, we made our way back along the twisting tunnel, the air growing ever fresher as we approached the hole we'd made in the side of the pyramid. Behind us, we left the looted burial chamber and 2 smashed sarcophagi, the stone one and the one made of wood. The shrouded body of Queen Mehuet lay where Samad had thrown it, once he realised that he'd found every precious object secreted within the layers of cloth covering the desiccated corpse, and the piece of rope that had been held in its hands, brown and almost turning to dust through sheer age. A simple piece of rope, there among the gold, silver and jewels the Queen was intended to take with her into the afterlife. Why? What had been the purpose of placing that length of rope in the dead Queen's hands? And the curse, the words I could not properly read written upon the top of the stone sarcophagus, but whose meaning I'd still instantly been able to realise. Then I had no more time for such thoughts, as I helped Samad and Froud put the pieces of stone back into the hole we had made in the side of the pyramid. We made a good job of it. You'd have had to have looked closely to realise that this pyramid had been broken into, and not many people went scaling the pyramids on a whim. Samad had been meticulous in his planning. He'd already found a small cave, set in one of the natural sandstone walls of the desert near the pyramid, where we could temporarily hide the treasure we'd looted.
"We are not finished yet," he cautioned us. "First I have to find a metalsmith I can trust, who can melt down the gold and silver. This may take some days. Go now, and I will find you when I am ready."
This last instruction hardly seemed fair, after all the efforts Froud and I had made, but as we both hesitated, clearly unhappy at this order, Samad's eyes gleamed danger, and we realised that it would be far wiser to obey him. We did not think he would cheat us anyway. We would hardly get as big a share of the profits as him, of course, but if we got nothing, we might just go straight to the authorities. We would almost certainly get immunity from our own crimes, and perhaps even a reward, by telling on him. The only alternative was that Samad could try to kill us, silencing us through death. Still, he'd know that, formidable a man as he was, 2 such murders would still be much easier said than done. The jackal-like Froud, especially, would be highly alert to any attempt on his life. No, we all knew, without us once actually mentioning such a matter, of course, that the simplest thing would be just for Samad to give us our share of what we had stolen, and then for the 3 of us to go our separate ways. I'd already decided to venture up along the Nile, staying in whatever villages I passed. And maybe I'd try to persuade Aoi to come with me. I have not spoken of Aoi till now, the girl I fully intended to marry. She had a fiercely protective father, with whom she lived there in the city of the dead, not too far from my own tomb. Her mother and elder sister had died in the plague that had ravaged Cairo, and so she was all her father had left. She was truly beautiful, with large green eyes and long flowing black hair, about my own age, 15 or thereabouts. I knew that a man had attempted to take her by force a year or so before, so besotted with her had he become. Aoi's screams had brought her powerful father running, and now her would-be rapist no longer had the use of his legs, and he merely dribbled when he tried to talk. So I feared for myself, as I had secretly become Aoi's boyfriend. Not that I had the slightest intention of doing her any harm, of course. Entirely the opposite, in fact. Despite my criminal activities, I was still a serious-minded Muslim male, and once I had wealth I fully intended to treat Aoi like the Egyptian queen she truly was. But her father, I suspected, might have had a somewhat different opinion concerning the matter, if he ever found out about the 2 of us. I returned to my family tomb with such thoughts running through my mind, and though I lay down there in the darkness of a blanket, besides the large square-shaped stone structure which contained the bodies of my parents and my grandparents, plus a number of other relatives, it was a long while before I slept. "We have been cheated." The words were Froud's. The jackal-like man had actually taken it upon himself to come and find me, the 3rd day after that evening we broke inside the tomb contained within one of the pyramids. Neither of us had seen or heard from Samad since. "How do you know this?" I demanded, the pair of us squatting down in our dirty robes by the side of the road. We looked just like many other males there in Cairo, poor but not quite beggars, day labourers perhaps, or something of the sort. Certainly no one would suspect us of being tomb raiders. Froud looked cautiously at me. He had a slight squint and a weak jaw. I knew he was afraid of me, although he was several years older. He was one of those people who you instinctively know will take a blow rather than give one. Yet for all of this, there was a certain cunning in him, the necessary knowledge and essential suspicion of human nature that enables a man to exist in such a place as the slums and back streets of Cairo. "The talk of him finding a metalsmith," Froud continued. "It was a lie, to buy him time. He's already gone, along the Nile maybe, taking all what we stole with him." I felt that maybe Froud was right. What fools we had been to have trusted Samad so readily. And yet, Still, part of me did not believe that he would have cheated us so. He was a harsh man, but such an action was not in his nature. Of this I was suddenly certain. There truly is some honour among thieves, after all. As I then told Froud, the simplest thing to do would be to return to that desert cave, where Samad had said that he'd stay with the looted treasure until such time as he was able to get it melted or sold, and see if he and everything we'd risked our very lives for really had just upped and vanished. In the scorching midday heat then, we traipsed out to the desert, passing those great silent pyramids and checking behind us before venturing towards the sandstone cave. In it we found both the treasure and Samad, but he stank a little, for the day was hot, and I suspected he'd already been hanging from the ceiling of the cave for several hours, perhaps since morning. Flies buzzed around his head. A rope was tied around his neck, dark brown, like the one I'd seen in Queen Mehuit's mummified hands. Scarcely knowing what I was doing, oblivious to Froud's petrified whimpering, I reached up and touched this rope, and it at once turned to dust, and so the already putrefying body of Samad the Master Thief fell to the rocky ground. I observed the look upon his greenish face, the sheer expression of horror in the bulging eyes, the blackened tongue protruding from the mouth, and all around lay the treasure we had stolen, tipped out of the sack Samad had brought with him. I joined Froud in bolting from that cave, both of us terrified almost out of our wits. "Suicide?" gasped Froud finally, once we were back within the somehow protective noise, bustle and stench of the city. "Samad, he hanged himself?" "Idiot," I returned, and so cold was my tone that I was almost shocked myself to hear it. "Did you not see that rope tied around his neck?" "It turned to dust the moment you touched it," cried Froud, so that I looked around, concerned someone might hear him. "How can such a thing be, if it was previously strong enough to hold up his body?" "It was the same rope we saw in the hands of Queen Mehuit," I said, and again I felt as though someone else was speaking the words, through me, as it were. The one she'd been holding for 1,000 years or more, there inside her sarcophagus. "How can that be? What does such a thing mean?" I shook my head. The moment had passed, and I had no ready answer to his frantic questions. "It is the curse, surely," I said at length, and my voice was now as feeble as Froud's own. "The one written upon the top of Mehuit's stone sarcophagus. The one you and Samad smashed into pieces, like the wooden one within, then throwing her body aside like so much garbage after he'd looted her body for the treasures it held." "Hey," said Froud, suddenly turning to face me, his eyes bulging and spittle gathered around his mouth. He reminded me of one of those wild dogs you sometimes saw, the ones with that strange sickness which they can give a human for a single bite. "You were in that tomb also," declared Froud. "Do not speak as though you are somehow innocent of the crime we committed." "The one which we will shortly be charged with and punished for, with a hand or two lopped off perhaps, if we somehow manage to escape execution, unless you lower your voice," I said coldly, my wits returning. Froud nodded, his expression reposing, and we continued walking, heading towards the city of the dead where Froud also resided. "I suggest we just forget everything that's happened and carry on as we did before. I do not expect to see you again, and make sure you never talk to anyone else about what has happened, as you value your life." At this, Froud nodded again, and shortly afterwards we went our separate ways. I did not know where he resided within that sprawling maze of tombs, nor did I care. I was mindful of only two things: Aoi and that sum of money, earned through the crimes I'd previously committed with Samad, that was still buried within my family's own tomb. Really, these were the only two things essential to my existence. With them, I might still succeed in doing something meaningful with my existence here in this world. But Froud did not intend to let me go. Somehow he discovered where I resided within the city of the dead, and the very next day he sought me out, unshaven and shaking. "Such dreams," he murmured, within the gloom of my family's tomb. "Nightmares, I should say. I've slept barely a wink, for every time I close my eyes—" "You should not be here," I said severely, clenching my fists as though I meant to attack him. "Go, now." "But I saw her," murmured Froud, his voice shaky with fear, sweat coursing from his face. He stank like an old goat. "Who do you mean, her?" "Her, the Queen Mehuet," he returned, his voice rising. Her face, swimming in and out of the darkness. Behind her, the jackal-headed one." This might have described Fowd himself, but something in what he was saying prevented me from feeling any amusement at this thought. "Anubis," I heard myself mutter.
Yes, and her smile," whimpered Fowd. "Her eyes so dark, so cruel, delighting in my terror. Her head was shaped like they used to shape their heads from infancy. It was her."
This last word came almost as a squeal, and at once I slapped him across the face. "Go now, and don't return again. You have weak nerves, and they have been strained by what happened recently. That is all. Samad hanged himself, for whatever reason. The gold and all the rest of it must remain beside his decaying body, which is already doubtless attracting everything within the desert that feasts upon carrion. I would not go back to that place for all the treasure that was in ancient Egypt. As I said to you yesterday, go, and never try to communicate with me again." But he came again the following morning, crying this time, puffy-eyed and pale as a corpse. He stank even worse, stank of sheer terror.
"The dream again, but this time she spoke to me in that dead tongue, and somehow I understood her every word. And her voice, a hiss, like a serpent."
I stared at him, trying to ignore the creeping sensation of absolute terror growing within my chest. But I had seen the rope from which Samad's body had been suspended. It was certainly the same one I had seen in Queen Mehuet's brown and claw-like hands, and had it not turned to so much dust after I had just touched it?
"She told me," Fowd's voice went whimpering on, "she told me that she will return for me tonight, again in my dreams, and that this time she will have a gift for me. Then she vanished, and I awoke just as dawn was breaking. Dear Allah the Most Merciful, was that the last dawn I am ever to see?"
"Where is it you live?" "Here in El Arafah," I demanded. Fowd told me. It was about as far as you could go from my own tomb and still remain within the city of the dead. "Return there," I said then. "I will come by and visit you later on."
"But
"Enough!" I cried, my own lurking feeling of terror quickly giving way to anger. "What would you have me do, exactly, about these bad dreams of yours? Give me time to think, at least."
"Maybe there is someone we can find here in Cairo who knows of the dark magic, and so can undo a curse that was made using its ancient power," babbled Fowd.
"Possibly," I murmured, more in an attempt to calm him than anything else. His voice kept rising with fear, and I was still concerned that someone passing by my tomb might hear some reference to the grave I had so recently helped rob. As I say, the authorities gave a generous reward to anyone whose information helped convict the tomb raider. "I will ask about," I said then. "But go, now, and leave me in peace for a while." With obvious reluctance, Fowd did as I instructed. I laid back down upon my blankets, my head spinning with everything I had recently seen and heard. I felt that I was fast losing my own mind. Samad had sneered at talk of ancient curses and the dark magic, yet he was dead, hanged with the same rope I had previously seen grasped in a mummy's hands. Was I going insane? How could this be? And now the jackal-faced Fowd, with all this talk of Queen Mehuet coming to him in his dreams, tormenting him as she spoke in a dead language which Fowd still somehow understood. Anubis stood just behind her, the jackal-headed one whom the ancient Egyptians had believed escorted all those who had just passed away to meet Osiris, god of the afterlife. Even with my eyes closed, I sensed that a shape was again blocking the square-shaped entrance to my tomb. I opened my mouth to yell at Fowd to leave me alone, yet before I did so I opened my eyes, and there was stood Aoi, the one person I loved and cared for in this world. She stayed with me for most of the day. Her father was away on some business, she said, and so we were safe from discovery.
"You seem distracted," she remarked after a while. "There is some problem weighing on your mind."
"There is nothing," I said firmly, attempting to smile at her.
"Yes?"
she returned sweetly, giving me that smile which caused me to melt inside. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask her to flee with me, to travel along the Nile and so seek a new life somewhere else in Egypt. Vague phantoms were crowding my heart, mind and soul, nameless terrors I could not fully describe yet somehow still felt.
"Come," said Aoi, "you are tired. Put your head here, my sweetheart, upon my lap, and I will sing to you."
If there was one thing that matched the dark-haired, green-eyed beauty of Aoi's physical features,
It was her bewitching voice. She sang like an angel, low and perfect, and so there, in the shade of my tomb, away from the fierce heat of the sun, I was gently lulled to sleep. When I awoke, I sensed that it was the following morning, and my head was no longer upon Aoi's lap. She had stolen away at some point, after her voice had calmed my racing mind and sent me to sleep, so to be there in her own tomb before her domineering father returned. As I rubbed my face and sat up, something nagged at my mind. Fouled, I quickly realised. I had made some sort of half-promise to him the previous morning that I'd come and see him later on, but I had not done so. I should have thought that he would have returned to my tomb later on to see where he was, and yet it seemed he had not done so. My sense of unease grew ever stronger, and I rose and left my tomb. It was not long after dawn, but already the day was becoming hot. I passed a few people, all of them scurrying about on some business or other. There was the sharp, almost bitter smell of coffee and frying lamb. My mouth watered and my stomach growled, but I had business of my own to attend to before I could entertain any notion of sitting down to breakfast. It took a good hour to get to Froude's tomb, following the directions he had given me the previous day. I recognised his orange brick tomb from his description. It was tattier than many of the other tombs, as though Froude, he said he lived in it alone, as I did in mine, wasn't too concerned with its upkeep. From what I knew of Froude, this didn't surprise me in the slightest. And yet, I viewed the entrance, covered on the inside with an old wooden board, with a mounting feeling of fear. I walked closer to it, almost instinctively starting to sniff the air. "Froude?" I said, my voice quiet at first. Louder, I repeated, "Froude?" There was no reply. This was a curiously deserted area of the City of the Dead. I was suddenly aware that there seemed to be no one else around. A dead stillness. There in the morning it was already so hot there was a haze in the air. I sniffed again. For what reason? I felt myself drawn towards a covered opening to the tomb. My hands felt as heavy and dead as stone as they slowly raised and pushed aside the flimsy piece of board, half rotted and much scratched at the bottom by wild cats. Froude was hanging as I had previously seen Samad hanging, above his bunched up blankets, his swollen, blackened tongue protruding from his mouth, his eyes swollen with terror. I did not think he had been dead long, for there was not yet that sweetish, repellent reek of decay, and in Egypt, one of the hottest of all desert countries, a fish pulled from the Nile should be consumed within 30 minutes, and all slaughtered meat cooked or salted as soon as possible. That old, brown, nondescript rope again, the one I had seen in Queen Meherit's hands, and then around Samad's neck. Again I reached out to touch it, and never have I wished to touch anything less. And again it immediately turned to dust, and with a thump, Froude's body fell to the floor where it lay, his bulging eyes staring straight at me. With a yell I fled from his tomb, running as fast as I could. I stopped only when I could run no more, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Already I had put a fair distance between myself and Froude's tomb, yet I knew that was not enough. First Samad had been killed, now Froude. Any fool could see that I was next, and that against the dark magic of the old kingdom, I was as helpless as a baby. That night the dreams began, swirling like poisonous smoke in my mind, containing vague, semi-formed images and shapes, dark and mysterious. But sometimes a pair of eyes appeared, beautifully made up, slanted at the edges with dark blue and black lines. Yet these eyes were mocking, contemptuous. They seemed to speak to me of some coming danger. I awoke feeling more tired, more on edge than I had been before I had even fallen asleep. Aoi visited me, there as I sheltered from both the heat and my nerves within my tomb, and I was short-tempered even with her. I did not leave my tomb all day, not eating anything, for I had absolutely no appetite. That night the shapes became more definite. Queen Meheret appeared before me, the owner of those beautiful eyes I had previously seen. Her head had obviously been bound in early childhood, so that it had grown flat at the top, while it protruded out at the back rather further than is usual. Behind her stood Anubis, the jackal-headed one. "Tomorrow," hissed Meheret, in that dead tongue I still somehow suddenly understood. She gave me a slight smile, which caused me to cry out aloud in terror. "Tomorrow you will follow the two others to the river of death, and there your eternal punishment shall begin." I tried to say something in return, to plead for mercy, but I found that although I understood this tongue of the ancient Egyptians, still I could not speak it. "You are not eating, my love, nor are you washing your body or clothes," Aoi said gently to me the following day. What is the matter weighing on your mind for you to be so? It is nothing, I returned curtly, though I knew myself without need of a mirror just how haunted my eyes must appear and how haggard my expression. Please tell me, for our own sakes, entreated Aoi, her voice as always remaining low and beautifully melodious. Leave with me, I said suddenly, taking hold of her arm. Let us leave this place and travel up along the Nile. She appeared surprised and then shook her head. My father would come after us, and you would be in grave danger, she said. Anyway, I cannot leave him, not like that. I am in grave danger anyway, I said harshly. I have much more to fear than the threat of a mere beating. What do you mean? In halting words I told her, of the tomb robbery, and of what had followed afterwards, and now these dreams of mine, which seemed exactly the same as Fouad had described. For the first time Aoi recoiled from me. Oh, you fool, she breathed, bringing her hands to that mouth I so longed to kiss, yet still had not. You have caused the danger 1,000 times worse than if you were to go straight to my father and tell him all about the two of us. What do I do? I begged, my hand still gripping Aoi's arm, even as she sought to get away from me. I don't know, she murmured, and at once she snatched herself free from my grasp. I will return. Maybe I will return. And again I was left alone in my tomb, to face what would come as I slept this coming evening. Whether I tried to remain awake, or whether I ran as far as I was able, it would make no difference. The ancient Queen Mehuit, accompanied by the jackal-headed one, would find me, and I would be the third one to receive my eternal punishment for having looted her tomb.
Take this. Put it around your neck,
she hissed, holding out the brown length of rope, one end of it fashioned in a noose. I whimpered, and again tried to plead for mercy, but those eyes just bored into my own, compelling me to do as I was told. I could feel myself choking, the noose fastening. But suddenly there came a cry, and on the very edge of my dream I saw Aoi shaking my sleeping body. She had returned to my tomb late at night, and now could not awaken me. I was presently stuck between two worlds, in limbo, my eternal judgment not yet fully past. He's only a boy, spare him. I love him, I heard Aoi cry, from somewhere very, very far away. For I was in a place where time and space are of no consequence, and I at once realised just how minuscule Egypt, indeed the whole world, is in comparison. Those beautifully made up eyes, set there in the flattened skull, softened just slightly.
It is true,
Queen Mehuit's voice hissed.
You are still a boy, and there is far less badness within you than there was in the other two men. So, maybe I have had revenge enough, but still you must be punished, and your punishment is this. When you awake, you must leave Cairo, make your way to the Red Sea, and from there get on a ship that is leaving Egypt. And never, ever must you return. Never, ever will you see the Nile again. Never, ever will you feel the breezes coming in from the desert late in the evening. Never, ever will you hold your girlfriend here in your arms, though you will often long to do so for the rest of your life. For wherever you go, Egyptian, you will be a stranger, fated never, ever again to be among your own people. And I give you fair warning now, that if you ever return to Egypt, you will instantly begin the same eternal punishment as those other two men are now experiencing. And you would rather you had been boiled alive for the rest of eternity.
So, Ennin Sensei, that is my story. You see, I had no choice but to immediately make my way to the Red Sea, saying farewell to Aoi, and after several years of travelling upon boats and trading, I found myself in this Japanese harbour town. I did not intend to stay here for any real length of time, but then where else should I go? In time I learnt the language, and so I was able to do business here and earn a living. It is true that I often do still think of Aoi, and still do I miss her touch and her voice so greatly. And I am and always will be a stranger here in this country. Accepted maybe, but never trusted. I have been punished enough, I think, for my youthful foolishness and helping to rob the final resting place of an ancient Egyptian queen. But enough of my lamentations. I see that you and your servant have drained this vast of sake, Ennin Sensei, while doing me the courtesy of listening to my rather long tale. Please, may I get you another?